Hello and welcome to the channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new, please click on like and subscribe. If you would, take just a second and leave a comment. Alright, I've got a small pile of lumber here I picked up. I'm going to try to build a dog ramp for the end of the bed so our little dog can get up on the bed easier. Basically what I've done is I've done a little hand drawing, a rough sketch of what I want to do. Got my list of materials. This isn't going to be super complicated, it's just going to be effective. So based on my little plan there, this is what I'm going to need to build it. So this is the basic set of tools I'm going to use. I might have to grab a thing or two out of the toolbox over there, but I don't think I will. I've got a skill saw, square, a straight edge, drill so I can drill pilot hole screw, screw gun, screws, wood glue, sander just in case I need to buff something out a little bit, a couple pencils, paper, tape measure. Now if you want to fasten this together with a nail gun, brad gun, whatever you want, feel free. This is just how I chose to do it. I'm trying to do this for more people that don't have an air compressor, a bunch of tools laying around the house. And we're still going to get the project accomplished and it still should look pretty good. So my basic drawing, I went online, tried to find something that looked like it would kind of work for me, and then I had to customize it to fit around our bed. Our footboard has a big curve around the front of it, so I can't really go flat against the bottom and just let the dogs jump on. Especially I go down the side of the bed, or down the front of the bed and up the side of the bed a little bit for them to get up on there. So I got some 1x3s, or actually it's 1/2 inch by 3 inch by 8 foot boards at the bottom here. Those are basically going to be my side rails for the ramp and the support for the ramp. I'm going to put a toe kick underneath the little bookcase I'm putting on the end of it. You can make a bookcase, you can do cubicles out of it, whatever you want. So that's what these boards are for, and then the longer boards. One's for the ramp itself, and then I've got one extra board just in case I need to make some extra cuts, or if I change my mind, I don't have to run back over to Lowe's and buy another piece of wood. So I sketched out my drawing here. Basically, this part is going to be the side of my bed. Halfway across here, 16 inches out, will be the ramp. So the ramp's going to join this, facing this direction here. I've got a 2-inch gap because that's the difference between the arch of my bed and where the mattress actually is. So I've measured all that out. I've got this ready to go. So I want to cut my bottom shelf last. I'm going to cut my 2 sides and my top first. So I'm going to cut the 2 sides. The top is going to go from edge to edge. So these are not on the outside. This is actually going to be on the top. So I'm not going to show you every cut, but I'm going to basically explain to you what I did. Those are my 2 sides. So I want my sides to be exactly equal. So I flushed out the end here. I flushed out the sides. I clamped the 2 boards together because I'm going to cut them at the same time. And by doing that, I'll get an even cut across here. So on this cut, I'm going to use the inside of my guide on this just to show you the opposite way of doing what I just did. And again, to get that edge to where I can cut it straight. My straight edge here, I'm doing this one-handed. I'll slide this up a little higher on the board. I'll take my square, put them in the right way. When I put my square on there, you'll see it lines up perfectly. Pull this tight with this hand, so I'm up against the edge of the board and I'm going to slide it until I'm just past where I want my line cut. So in this case I'm going 2 inches in, and then again that gives me a nice straight edge. When I pull that off, I clamp it, I slide my skill saw right across that. So there's my edge clamped in place. Let's see if I can cut and this at the same time. I'm not sure if I can or not. I'll probably start the cut and then I'll go back and edit it in. Alright, so you can see I've got my saw up against my straight edge, and that way I get a straight cut across this board. Okay, I've got my 2 sides, my top, my bottom plate cut. Now I wanted 32 inches height total on this, so basically this is cut at 3/4 inch shorter than what it needs to be to allow the compensation for the top to go over the top of the boards, not inside of them. The inside's the opposite. It's 1.5 inch shorter than what the shelf should be to compensate for the inside of here. Now if I had a table saw, I would go ahead and cut my middle shelf out because I know my measurements would be exactly the same. Since again I'm doing this by hand, I want to go ahead and put my 2 sides on, my top on, my bottom on. I'm going to go ahead and put my kick plate underneath of it, and then I'll measure the distance on the inside of it to make sure my shelf's exactly where I want it at. Again, if you had a table saw or something set up where you could lock it in place every time, or if you're just a super good carpenter, your measurements are probably more precise than mine. But again, I'm not a carpenter by trade, so I'm going to put mine together, then remeasure it, and then cut the board as I need it. Now I do know that my inside piece for my kick plate under the bottom and the back piece that goes for the kick plate are going to be the same size as my bottom shelf. So I'm going to take my bottom shelf out here, I'm going to lay it down, I'm going to mark my 2 cuts for my kick plate so I can go ahead and have them ready also. So what I've done is I've clamped my toe kick board on top of the shelf, or the bottom plate, or bottom shelf. Same thing, I flushed it out here, flushed it out in the corner, and basically underneath there, I just took a pencil, drew a line underneath with it. So if I cut on the line, not on the outside edge or an inside edge, I make the line disappear when I cut. This will be exactly the same as this. Now again, if you're a good carpenter, you can also flip this over now and just use the straight edge from that, lay your saw back up against it and nip it off, which is what I'm going to do. So there's my bottom where my 2 toe kicks are going to be. That's the front, back. I will inset this a little bit just so it looks a little bit better. You got a place to put your toes on it. You don't knock your feet off on the front. Now this is where you might use your sander at. These boards that you buy are not always perfect. So I've got this flushed out over here on this side, but in the middle here I've got a little bit of an arch. It's not much, you can't even see it probably on the camera, but basically I can take my sander and I can hit that and make this straight across the edge. Or I can pick the other side, which is flusher. As you can see, that one side flushes out really good on the floor. Not all lumber, just because it comes from Lowe's or something that's pre-cut, is even. So we'll make sure I'm gonna put this on the back side of my unit because it's just more for stability. That's gonna be seen, and if I grind this down, the bow actually goes in. I flipped it over the other way, it comes up too high. So in order to not make my cabinet sit crooked or the front or the back of it look sideways, I'm just going to flip the board around to where it fits the best at. But again, if you have a planer or something like that, we're going to hit it with a planer. So I went ahead and changed my mind a little bit about the shelf for the middle. Basically, I took the bottom plate and I cut the shelf. And it's about, I don't even know if it's a 16th, maybe a 32nd of an inch just inside of the bottom plate. That'll let me slide it in between without actually creating a bow in my shelf, so I don't want my sides to bow out in the middle. So my shelf's actually a hair smaller than the inside edges, so I can draw it in a little bit if I have to, but it won't be bowed out. So there's all my basic pieces for my end cap. So I've laid this on the floor, I've just mocked it up in place. Again, I'm going to use screws in mine, I'm going to countersink the screws a little bit. We're painting this, so I'm just going to take some wood filler when I get done, fill the tops of the screws in, and then we'll paint over top of it. You'll never see them. You could dowel it, you could put wood glue on it, you can attach this as many ways as you want to. Again, my preferred method this time is just using screws. So I'm going to go ahead and screw these pieces together. And since I'm working by myself, this is kind of a two-hand operation. Basically what I'm going to do, again, countersink bit. I'm going to put the square inside of here, square up my edge and make sure it's nice and square. I'll also measure across it once I get the square work done before I put the shelf in to make sure my project is square. Not sure if I'm going to put a back on this yet or not. I was thinking about putting a back on it, but I think the dogs will like it better if it's open because it'll give them an escape under the bed, so I'm not sure about that yet. I'll figure it out once I get it done, but again, take your square, put it on the inside of here, or you can make 45s out of your leftover lumber if you want, and you can actually brace these corners. I might do that on the back side, but as of right now, I'm going to put it together, see how stable it is without those. I'm trying to keep it as clean as I can, at least on the face. So that's what I'll end up with. Again, countersink it in just a little bit. I'll take a little wood filler when I'm done, cover it up, paint it, and you'll never see them. And before you go gung-ho and just put a bunch of screws across there, I set one at the top, and then again, I'm going to use my square. I'm going to put my square in the bottom there, and I'm going to square that up before I actually put the bottom screw in. And again, this is back to where the wood's not always perfect. In a perfect world, if you had a table saw and you were doing this right, you would take the factory cut of lumber and actually nip a little bit off the bottom of it. That way you would know you'd have a perfect edge. I'm not looking for perfection here, so if it's off a 1/16 of an inch or something, I don't care. But in a real world, you would nip the bottom off, even the pre-cut lumber, to make sure it's a nice straight edge. Okay, so I've got my basic frame put together there. I flipped it up on its side there. Here's my kick plate, and I squared it off. I just used a little small piece at the bottom just for a little bit of support in the middle of the shelf. I got my first shelf in there, and basically I'm just going to take it, screw it to the bottom there, screw it to the bottom over here, and it should be good. Bottom shelf will be in, I'll slide my middle shelf in, and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so there's my bottom attached. I just used 4 screws in the front, 4 screws in the back. Again, I put this little piece on the front of it. I did take my sander and hit a couple of the rough edges on this. And again, depending on the finish you're going for, this wood is pretty inexpensive wood, let's call it. Since lumber's so high right now, can't really afford super expensive wood to build a dog ramp. So this is not the smoothest in the world, so you could actually take your sander and sand the whole thing down if you were going to stain it. Again, we're painting, so I'm going to put a layer of primer on there, a layer of paint, so it's not going to bother me any. Once you get this base together and everything together, make sure all your edges are smooth. If you've got an overhang or something, like on here I've got a little bit of an underlip, but again, this is for my kick plate, it's not going to matter, it's not supporting the structure. My sides and my back and my bottom piece are supporting the structure, so, but if you wanted to, you could take your sander and just smooth out the edges. So the next thing I want to do is I want to take my shelf. I'm just going to go ahead and slide it in here. And again, that should fit pretty good. It should have a little bit of gap, not much. And again, that's just so when you draw it in, you don't actually bow the sides of the unit out. You can leave it a little bit loose on one side or the other. And take a little wood filler, a little bit of caulk, and just caulk it so when you paint it, you'll never see it. One more thing you can do on these shelves, if you're putting a lot of weight on these, I'm just going to put screws through the side and let the weight support the middle, because again, we're just putting dog toys and stuff like that, nothing heavy on here. But you can take a small piece of wood if you want to, and you can actually create a cleat on the side of here. Anchor the cleat in here, and then your shelf would sit on top of that to support the weight if you're putting a heavy object on there. The other thing you got to remember too, if you're going to do that, you're going to be able to see that little nub from the front. So you're going to have to either put a trim piece around the front of it. I'm not going to trim the face of this out, I'm just going to leave it like it is. If we're going to trim the face out or put like a frame around the inside of it or outside of it, I could do that, and then the frame's going to cover it up anyhow. Or if you're going to do a little fancier shelf and put like a lip coming down off the shelf, again, this is just going to look more like a bookcase at the end for dog stuff. Depends on how fancy you want to make it. So that's going to be my end piece. Basically, you could do 2 shelves in there, 3 shelves. You could do as many shelves as you want. You could cube it out, however you want to do the inside. I'm going to start with those 2 shelves to see if that's enough. If not, I can always move one up or add one or whatever I want to do with it. And I was saying about these gaps over here. If you've got a big gap in here, when you're screwing this together, if you flip it up on like that end, put some pressure down on top of this board. When you screw it in, you might be able to get some of these gaps out of here. Again, I don't want to put 1,000 screws on the side of this. I'm okay with where it is. Everything's tight. I'm tight at the top, tight at the middle, tight at the bottom. These little tiny gaps here, I'm just going to take some caulking, some painter's caulk, fill up that gap, and draw a line across it. That way when I paint it, you'll never see them in there. The other thing you could also do is put holes in here, and you can actually make the shelves adjustable if you wanted. Again, I'm not going into this. This is just more of a DIY, easy to do shelving. So I'm ready to start my ramp now. So what I did is I measured my length of my board, which was 76 inches. I leaned it up against the piece after I cut the 76 inches. And I have an inside corner, outside corner measurement from Lowe's. It's a cheap little tool you can get. Use this to do quarter round, crown molding, figure out wall angles, things like that. So what I did is once I put this on here, I figured out my bottom end. I took this and set it up until I got my slope. My slope was 23 degrees. So just a quick summary, I did my 23 degrees, 90 degrees is straight down, 67 degree angle. So I back cut this at 67 degrees, then I went down to the bottom and I cut another little 23 degree angle off the bottom just so it would sit a little bit flatter. And I'm going to take this board, now that I got it in place where I want it, and I'm going to go ahead and just mark the other one so they're identical. So what I did is I took my skill saw, loosened the angle, and I just took my blade laid that flat, and then I laid my blade up against there and then locked the saw in place. That will give me the correct angle for the top, so it'll join to the top of my box correctly. Another little tip while I was working on this, I did take a clamp, put the clamp in there basically to hold it in place for another hand. Since again I'm working by myself here, I need some way to hold that in place. So the next thing I want to do now is I want to go back to my double beams. I'm going to take off 1.5 inches width, and I'm going to make basically a ladder down through here to create some support so when the dogs walk on it, it doesn't cave in the middle. Okay, so I've got my board cut. Again, I've got the angle cut at the top that I needed to match my side rails. I just cut me 2 ladders. Our dogs, the biggest one weighs 20 pounds. It'll be going up the ramp. So if you've got a heavier dog, you can put more supports in there. You can also turn them either upright or sideways. That's entirely up to you. I'm probably going to put mine in like that just to give me a little bit more support. If you want to kind of hide them a little bit more, again, I'm still 50-50 on which way I want to go. I may turn it in that way. If you're looking from the side of it, you're not going to see a little piece of board hanging down. So I just want to go over one thing while I'm doing this. I ended up with this outside board had a nice little warp to it. So instead of taking my regular beams across here like I did up here at the beginning, once I got to the warp down here at the bottom, what I did is I took 2 smaller pieces of board, secured it to the outside edge, then I ran a screw from the bottom and pulled this down to where it belonged. Same thing on this side. I went ahead and attached this side, drew it down to where it belonged, and then I joined the 2 in the middle. So it's kind of like a little cheater. Plus also, if you ever cut your board too short, you can take 2 pieces. Again, this is going to be hidden. No one's ever going to see it. But anyhow, that got my curve out of there, so I drew it down, just attached the board here, and then put the 2 together to keep it from spreading back apart. So I've kind of mocked it up into place here. I've got my top screwed on now. I just screwed it in, I think, 2, 4, 6, 8 places on each side. I'm going to cover this with carpet, so I'm not too worried about finishing the top or filling the holes. I ended up putting the slats in sideways underneath for the support beams. Again, this wood's not the best wood in the world. There's some bows and some imperfections in the wood. For what I'm using for, I'm okay. But I had to turn them sideways so I could basically force the boards up, down, left, right where I needed them to. I test fit everything, make sure my angle was good at the top. This is going to be set up as a 2-piece unit, so I want to be able to pull the ramp away from the bookcase, or whatever you want to call that part there, so we can move it around and clean underneath of it and stuff. I'm going to leave this as an open concept underneath because the dogs like to lay underneath the ramps. So the next step is putting a back on it, so basically the ramp will stay in freestand. The way I cut the angles at the foot at the bottom, I'll probably have to put some rubber pieces on it. We have tile in the house, so I'll put some sort of rubber on it to keep it from sliding down. But once I figure out how I'm going to do the back, the ramp should basically stand alone. The bookcase will stand alone. I'll cover the top of the ramp. I'll cover the top of the platform. I'll probably paint the sides of it first so it's painted so I don't get paint all over my little stick down carpet, but we'll see. Okay, so I've kind of sketched out my ramp support. Basically, I'm just going to have one support beam up in the back. I'm going to screw it through the sides. But on the inside, I'm going to put a platform at the bottom. I'm going to turn a board sideways across the middle for more support. And then basically just keep it at that. Now if you want to get fancy, you could use a wider board. You could take your board and you could arch it in. Again, I'm not trying to get too fancy on this, but you could do this any way you wanted to. But basic support wise, this is going to be about a 6-inch wide platform, 6 inches on the sides. And then this will probably be 6 inches also, since I'll just keep all my measurements about the same. So I'll get 6-inch board and put them all together. Now at the top of these boards, when I cut them, I will cut a angle to match the top of my board here. So that's a 23-degree angle. So when I cut the tops of these, I will back cut them. So up under here, the angle you see here is how I'll cut this also. So it sits right up underneath there. Again, that's something else you don't have to do if you're going to put bolts through this or you're going to screw it to the side. Technically, it's going to hold the ramp up anyhow. But I do have one big dog that every now and then decides she wants to go where the little dogs go. And I just want to be able to support her just in case she decides to go up the ramp for some reason. got a piece of white pine left over from another project I was doing. I'm going to use this for my ramp support since I have it. I'm going to rip it in half. But first thing I want to do is I'm going to put my angle for the top. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my 23-degree angle. Then once I get that angle cut, I'm going to cut off the bottom a little bit longer, rip it down the middle, and then cut the two pieces equal length. And that way I can cut both of my top angles exactly the same. Again, I'm going to lay it over top like I did the other boards outside, clamp them together, cut the bottoms also. I've got two even sides when I do this. Now if you've never used a square before, again, this may be a new little project to you. If you look at the top here, you'll notice, if I can get the camera to angle, like I was saying before, the pivot point's almost here. This board's obviously not cut 100% straight. My square is up against the edge. Again, that's back to, you know, even though it's pre-cut from the factory, it's not always exactly correct. So if you want something exactly correct, you need to probably straighten up all your edges by yourself, cut the end off, and then redo it. Since I'm actually going to come down a little bit here, I'm going to cut just below that line so my tops will be even, and I'm cutting an angle anyhow, so it wouldn't matter as much. Alright, so I've marked my pivot point up at the top. Down here on the bottom where the numbers are, that's your degrees of angle. So basically I'm going to go down here, I'm going to pick a 23-degree angle. So I'm cutting in this way, so 23 is right about here. So I'm just going to mark that on there. I'm going to flip my edge around and I'm going to draw a straight line across it. So after I drew my line across, there's my 23-degree angle. So I'm going to cut this off first. Again, I'm going to cut these longer than what I need so I can split it down the middle, and then I'm going to lay the two over top of each other and then cut the two bottoms off at the same exact time. So I've got two exact pieces. So I've got all my marks on here. So again, just to recap, did my angle first. So I measured my board width. It's a little bit over 11 inches. So in the middle, 5.5 would be 11 inches. So I went 5 and like 5/8. Mark my line down the middle of the board. Again, I've got my angle already cut, so I'm going to cut this top angle. This piece will be gone. I know my height of my cabinet is 32 inches long. So I went down through here and I pulled a line from this corner to at least 35 inches. So I know for a fact I'm going to be higher than what I need to be. So I'm going to cut the board off here, and then I'm going to rip it down the middle, stack this piece on top of this piece, and then cut both of them off to the exact same length. Okay, so I cut my angle. I've got my two boards at the different lengths I wanted. Now, again, boards aren't perfect unless you cut every single board yourself. So this has got a little bit wider patch at the top, a little smaller at the bottom. What's important is my outside edge, and most important is my angle at the top here is flushed. Because when I cut this across here, if this angle up here isn't right, your feet aren't going to sit right on the floor and it's going to wobble, and you're going to have to try to find a way to make it flush. So basically, my 45s or my 23 up here at the top, this is going to be a 90 straight across here. That's the most important part, to get it sitting flush on the floor. If you wanted to, you could take your saw and you could actually rip down through here and make both these boards exactly the same sideways. Again, one's on the inside, one's on the outside. They're minimal, 1/16 of an inch apart. No one's going to ever know the difference, except for you guys, because I told everybody. I measured the inside of my shelving unit, or my end box, end cap, whatever we're going to call it. 31.5 inches is where I want to cut at. So I'm going to cut it on the outside edge. I'm going to mark my 31, and I'm going to cut the saw blade on the outside edge of that line. So there's my finished cut. Again, my bottoms are exactly the same because I cut them at the same time. Tops are exactly the same because I flushed them out. This side's the same, and again, this one little overhang here, I'm not going to mess with it. You could if you want to. I'm just going to take them apart and start putting my other pieces together. So before I go much further, brought it in just to test fit it, and they look like they're pretty much right on the money. Might have to just take a little bit of this corner, oops, sorry, just to avoid any top piece hitting right here. I'm going to take these and I'm just going to nip the edges off right up here at the top, just so I've got a flusher spot for my ramp to hit, and I'm not have to worry about these lining directly up. So as you see, I've changed my design again. Basically, I was thinking, when I was going to put these supports in, I was going to use them like left and right, kind of like this way. I'll knock everything over just for support. But I figured, why not just turn them up this way, make a couple extra shelves on the inside, so we can store the dog bowls and stuff like that in here. The bed will be underneath the ramp to the side. And then this top one will mainly be just to support the top of the ramp. So I need to make sure this one is below the angle of the ramp, so I don't want to go right to the corner, because when my ramp comes down, my ramp's going to hit. So I'm actually going to come down a few inches, screw these into place. I'm going to measure them out so they're evenly spaced. And then I'm going to screw this in. The ramp's going to float down over top of this. I'm going to screw this right through the side of the ramp. And basically the ramp should stand alone then. Ready to go. Like I said, any little cracks or crevices that you have, you can either loosen your screws back up if you did screws, push down a little harder and try to form it in. If you can't get them to form in place, I've got a couple little cracks on the right hand side. Again, I'm painting, so I'm just going to take some caulk, fill in the holes, paint it, and you'll never see them. So the next step is to attach my ramp to my ramp support. So it was a little bit tight at the top when I put this together, so I took out my very top shelf there, went ahead and put this in place, anchored it in, and then I'm going to go back and shave my top shelf down and put the top shelf back in. But as you can see, the ramp matches up to the top. There's about a 1/16 of an inch gap here, but since I'm putting carpet on here, the carpet should actually come up and match it. Worst case, I could, put something on the bottom of the feet and raise it up a hair if I needed to, but again, for what I'm doing with it, I think it'll be perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and put my top shelf back in, and then basically get it ready to paint. I'm going to fill in all the screw holes, and I'll show you the end result when I get done with it. Prep for paint. Basically anywhere I had a little small crack, filled in with the painter caulk, paintable caulk, door, window, any type of caulking you can say in the paint. My side holes, I patched all those. I just filled those in with regular spackling. Again, since I'm doing paint, you could wood fill them if you're going to stain it. Latex paint's just going to cover it up. So basically anything that's exposed, I've got covered up. Anything that's still exposed, I'm going to cover up with like carpet. So the top screws, there's no sense in filling them because I'm just going to put carpet over it anyhow. So that's the finished result. I did go back afterwards and make a little handrail for the side of it. The dogs got up there pretty easily, but I put the rail up on the side. It made them feel a little bit more comfortable. So they go up and down a lot easier than they did before.